Hi, welcome. My name is Rachel Dussault, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Residence 11. We're a website and community that celebrates sensuality, romance, intimacy, and loving in a new age of human connection. You can find us at residence11.com. And today we're talking to Dee Dussault about using cannabis to enhance your sex life. Dee is the best-selling author of Ganja Yoga and internationally recognized pioneer of the cannabis wellness movement. 13 years ago, Dee became the first person to offer public enhanced yoga classes. And 4 years ago, she authored the HarperCollins book with the same title. And that's been featured in the New York Times, Business Insider, and Wall Street Journal. Ganja Yoga has been taught to thousands of students in over 20 US cities, and hundreds of people from around the world have taken the Ganja Yoga teacher training. And to make things even more fun, he's also a sensuality coach trained in Tantra Yoga with a private partner yoga and intimacy practice in Berkeley, California. And you can find out more at Ganja Yoga on Instagram and learn more about Dee at ganjayoga.com and deedussault.com. Well, first, let me tell you, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're watching this so you can catch all our interviews. So Dee, I'm definitely going to ask you about what you do now, but first I want to go back a little to what did you learn about sex growing up, whether at home or at school or from your friends or pop culture? And I guess also, how have your views about sex changed since the earliest things you've learned about?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rachel. I had the privilege of growing up in a very sexually liberated home. My mom was, kind of a feminist, and so she had some books around sexuality at home. And so conversation around sex or nudity is pretty normal. So I didn't have a lot of negative conditioning around sexuality. Of course, just being in our culture, there's conditioning, even if your family is not participating in it, anti-body conditioning, anti-pleasure conditioning, anti-masturbation conditioning, all of that. So I still got my share, even though I didn't have, a patriarchal family or, a religious family upbringing. And so now, what have I learned about sex that's changed? Quite a lot. I think, even with my liberated mom and my, pleasureful home growing up, there was really not as much emphasis on, the role of sensuality, the role of foreplay, and, sex was still depicted as, intercourse or, kind of a means to an end, toward an orgasm. And now as I'm older and as I've experienced a lot of sex and sexuality, I realize that, the genital stuff is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the pleasure, connection, joy, that sex brings. So, you can have a very sexual experience with your clothes on, as I'm sure you know. So yeah, my definition and understanding of sexuality has increased and expanded to incorporate all of that yummy foreplay stuff and sensuality stuff.
Oh, I definitely want to ask you more about that later. So, but I want to go to the cannabis and the yoga. When and why did you start incorporating cannabis into your work as a yoga teacher? And what was there a specific inspiration for that?
Yeah, so I was studying sexuality at university. I was doing my grad school training to actually. I thought I was gonna make porn for women. I was really interested in why there was such an orgasm disparity between the genders in heterosexual relationships. But partway through grad school, I dropped out to become a yoga teacher because I found grad school very disembodied. I wanted to help women and help people with their sexuality, but not, in an essay. So I took a tantra yoga training in the lineage of Swami Satyananda Saraswati. I think it's important we name our lineages, so I'll just do that quickly. And as I was doing my yoga training, I was getting into cannabis. I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. I was my late 20s. I tried it in high school, got paranoid, thought it wasn't for me. And then I was getting into it again as I was doing my yoga training, and I asked my teacher, my yoga teacher, I'm finding cannabis is making my yoga practice more available. I'm even more desirous of doing yoga. I feel like it more when I'm high. My muscle relaxation, my inflammation, everything feels yummier in my body. And I'm more attuned to esoteric anatomy, the chakras, energies, kundalini. I'm feeling all of these sort of spiritual aspects that we're learning about in the training, much more so when I'm high. Is this okay? Am I bypassing spiritually? Am I cheating? And she reminded me that, everyone's path to the mountaintop is different. And a lot of Indian yogis use cannabis to worship Lord Shiva. It's a 1,000-year-old tradition in India and around the world to use cannabis for spiritual purposes. So she said, as long as you're mindful, every intoxicant can have potential pitfalls, but as long as you're mindful, use it for your spiritual practice. So I've been using it for my yoga, and I, created Ganja Yoga. And I've been using it in my sexuality as well. And I don't know if, you or your listeners use cannabis, but for those of us that like the plant, it can make things you enjoy even better, like nature, comedy, dancing. It doesn't make taxes better because you don't like doing taxes, but it makes things you like to do even better. So sex and yoga for me are really enhanced, with the right strain and dose. So I've been doing both sexual cannabis enhanced sexual coaching and cannabis enhanced yoga now for both 13 years. And yeah, the cannabis piece is not for everyone. I'm not here to, convince people who are not interested in cannabis that they should use it. But for people who are curious about using it for foreplay and for sex and sensuality and yoga, I have a lot to share about it.
So in terms of using cannabis for sexual pleasure and to enhance it, like you just talked about, is that different? Are there different things you should do than if you were just using it recreationally? Do you have advice for people who maybe already use it in their daily life, but haven't used it specifically around sex yet?
Yeah, totally. So, I would say like with most things, it's good to practice, an instrument on your own before going and playing in a band with others. So, using cannabis for solo self-care, solo, masturbation and self-love practices can help us to develop a relationship with the plant and the different products and methods of consumption and dosing that, each of us is going to need, depending on our tolerance, our intentions, our experience and our relationship with the plant, the dose that we use, the method that we use is going to be different. But for pretty much anyone newer to cannabis or newer to using it with sex, I would say, as well as, starting by yourself, is ideal. I would suggest to start with a low dose of cannabis because you can always add more, but you can't add less. And it's not like anything, terrible will happen necessarily if you overconsume, but you might, blow your opportunity to have a beautiful, sensual afternoon and instead get couch lock on one end of the spectrum or potentially paranoia on the other end of the spectrum. So a nice low dose. And when we're thinking about strains, it's sometimes advisable to consider a hybrid. Indica strains are really relaxing. So, for many people, that would be a great choice, but they can bring that couch lock where you get demotivated to even be sexy or do yoga. So a hybrid will get the relaxing part of the indica, but a little bit of the uplifting part of the sativa. A hybrid is like the balanced blend, the middle blend. So a low dose, with an indica leaning hybrid. And then when you think of methods of consumption, for sex or, masturbation, I always ask my clients to consider where they're curious. Like, are you curious about smoking or not at all, into smoking? Are you curious about dabbing or cannabis lubes, CBD products? Where is your interest? Your topicals, edibles? So oftentimes I would recommend the method, that you're most interested in and avoid the ones that maybe you're scared of or not into, like maybe dabbing seems intimidating. So low dose, a nice hybrid strain, and then method, it's really up to the person. If I were to say a method, a very low dose edible or tincture would be my top choice because they really have an extremely delicious body feeling, but you really have to keep the dose low. So 5 milligrams, or for someone very sensitive to cannabis, 2.5. I use 10 or 20 milligrams, but I'm a seasoned cannabis user, so it's different for everyone. But the somatic experiencing of an edible, wow, it's like, for me, it makes the sensory aspects of sex and the orgasm much, much stronger. And it lowers inhibitions, and I'm, kind of more available and vulnerable with my partners. So yes, I love a good edible.
So if we're talking about partnered sex, do both people will it be better if both are doing it, or if only one person is interested in incorporating cannabis and the other isn't? Like, can that work?
Can work. I mean, certainly no one should consume cannabis if they're not interested. Never any pressure, from me or from either partner. So if only one person wants to use cannabis, that can work fine. I would be mindful of the dose and keep the dose on the lower side so that you're still sort of on the same page or same wavelength. The pitfall could be that one person's kind of tripping and in a complete altered state, and then you might feel disconnected from like, where are you? But if sometimes that's fun. Like if I'm going to give my partner, something where he's just fully receiving, like I'm going to give you an hour-long tantric full body massage, then yeah, he can dose high. He doesn't have to be present for me. He's just receiving. But if it's something where like a more conventional sex where both people are giving and receiving, you might want to stay on more of the same wavelength. A small dose would be fine, but you want to keep it small. But ideally, in a perfect world, if both people are interested in using cannabis, then both would. Their dosing may be different, but even just one little puff, and maybe the other partner takes several puffs. What I like about joints is, as you grind it, you can smell the different terpenes and pick this. Wow, smell this! It becomes sensual even before you consume. It's already enhancing our sensuality, which is on a spectrum to sexuality. When we titillate our senses, when we put on the moisturizer or sniff the chocolate mousse, I'm in some ways, adding to my sexual energy later when I cultivate my senses. So cannabis is so sensual, the taste, the smell, the feel. So it's sort of, priming us for sex even before we get the chemical or drug effect, which I love. So in that way, I really love rolling or packing a bowl or something. It's really fragrant.
So you mentioned like a full body tantric massage. Are there any sex acts or types of sex that you would recommend, particularly like after using cannabis, and maybe also any, the opposite that you wouldn't? Like I'm thinking bondage or something more complex. Is that something, especially if you're new to it, you should maybe stay away from when you're high or in an altered state?
Yeah, definitely. Just like, it's if I'm new to cannabis, I would advise someone new to cannabis to develop a solo, self-love practice before having partnered sex with cannabis, to masturbate using the plant, get your own, okay, today I'll try 2 tokes or I'll try a half a joint and figure out my dose and what works for me before adding that other variable of the partner. In the same way, if you're playing with new types of sexual activities, beyond what you're used to, if it's, BDSM or something like that. It's not to say cannabis can never be used in that with these types of play, but it's like if you're new to that type of play and you're new to cannabis, then do one or the other first, get your relationship, or a new partner, have some sober sex with your new partner before adding cannabis, or a new thing you and a long-term partner are doing that's new. Well, do that sober and then, add cannabis, or, so that we're not having too many unknowns or too many variables. You can't overdose on cannabis. You can't, die or cause any major problems, but the paranoia or couch lock issues are real, and anyone who's over consumed knows that these are very unpleasant feelings. So adding sexual energy, adding potential, bondage or other activities like that, there's just like a lot of variables. So especially for sex that's going to be more unusual or vulnerable in those ways, I would suggest adding cannabis after you've had a number of experiences without it. What cannabis is really good for, in my opinion, is lowering inhibitions, lowering our emotional and psychological barriers to intimacy. In many ways, it's similar to MDMA for people who use that for the same reason. It can help us to actually show up and be present and let go of, Rumi says, don't look for love, but release the barriers to receiving love. I feel like cannabis can really help to lower those barriers and help us to really show up. And when we show up, we slow down. So even if we don't know Tantra yoga or tantric sex, cannabis can help us to just simply slow down whatever it is we're already doing. And that's a big part of Tantra, is just slowing, savoring, being present. So cannabis is great for emotional intimacy, for cuddling, for non-goal oriented touch, like stroking and caressing that isn't a means to an end. When I do my sex coaching, I encourage my couples to let go of the word foreplay, because it's all foreplay. I'm sure you guys maybe have heard foreplay begins the moment the previous orgasm was over. So it's like 3 days ago when I had my last orgasm, everything my partner and I have been doing to give each other compliments, to, slow down as I put on my moisturizer, all this is foreplay for the next experience. So, I don't like the thought of the word foreplay. It sounds like, intercourse or genital sex is the main thing, and foreplay is just the appetizer. I like thinking of it as sexy play or sensual play. And I feel like cannabis is really, really great at slowing us down so that we are less goal oriented and more of this holistic or circular approach where we're just in the moment without trying to make something happen. And for people who have issues becoming aroused due to stress or overwork or children or whatever, cannabis is great because if you don't feel in the mood for sex, sometimes even just smoking one with your partner or having a little edible or cannabis tincture, okay, I'm not horny, I'm not in the mood, but I am in the mood for, connection. So, okay, it may not lead to sex the way our culture calls sex, but we're stroking, we're looking into each other's eyes as we fall asleep. We had a deep, pleasurable moment. Like, what else do we need? We kind of get to redefine sex and intimacy with the use of cannabis. And I think that's a really valuable tool because so many people are having trouble with arousal with so many, stressors in our world that, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be horny and to be, wanting to have sex a certain number of times a week. Maybe if we just take that all off the table and say, well, let's just get high and see what happens. And maybe it's just a really intimate cuddle or a massage or a makeout session. It doesn't have to lead to genitals. It may. I think that's a lot healthier for us because it has a much more expansive definition of sex and of intimacy. So that's one of my favorite parts of cannabis is that sensual piece.
That definitely makes sense. So
Yeah.
you mentioned your work as a sexuality coach. Can you tell us more about what that entails and with your clients, what are the most common reasons people tend to work with you? And are you generally, you mentioned couples, is it almost always couples or partners, or do solo people also work with you?
So for the last 13 years, I've been doing sex coaching with this tantric tradition, the training that I did in my yoga training. And so bringing sensuality, mindfulness, and a spiritual or ceremonial aspect to our lovemaking. And a lot of my clients are couples. It seems as though that's I don't know, a population that's really, needing this work. I do get, singles or, people in a partnership, but just one person comes all genders come. When women come for me, it's often a feeling of disconnect from our sexuality due to stress and responsibility and feeling disembodied. And when my male clients come, it's usually premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction issues. Similar. And then couples, it's like finding the time or finding the desire, finding the charge. When you live with someone, you have children, you see them every day. Where's the other? How do we keep that other? Because that's where passion is. As Esther Perel and others have said, we need the other in order to have the charge. So helping couples to find the charge. But yeah, I do work with individuals as well, single people of all genders, to either help to tune into their sexuality or to refine it so it's not happening sooner or than your partners. That's often an issue and it's almost always related to stress. So we always do some amount of yoga or mindfulness or meditation, affirmations, things like that. It's a huge piece that it's just like we say stress is related to sexuality, but we don't actually, do the stress reduction techniques to let that go. We need to.
I'm definitely in that camp. So for someone considering hiring a sex coach, what questions should they be asking ahead of time? And is there anything they should be preparing or thinking about going into that process?
Yeah. So, I think at least when you're hiring, a therapist, and I think it's the same with sex coaches, the modality or, the training or lineage is less important than the feeling of connection you have with the person. So there's all different schools of thought around sex coaching, different lineages and trainings. And those are important, how much studying they did and what philosophy they're coming. But even more so is, do you feel like they're really listening? Do you feel like you're really connecting? So, having an intake call, a complimentary intake call to me is a required part of being a coach. So people can see if they actually connect with us. It's just a 10 or 15-minute thing there. So that's the first piece, is feeling like your sex coach is really present, really cares, really, you really feel a sense of connection and feeling understood. And then, so, second to that is, having a sex coach that has, integrity and boundaries, maybe they have testimonials on their site or some way to feel safe, because, as we talk about vulnerable issues, our sexual concerns, whether erectile dysfunction or, libido issues, yes, mostly it's always tied to stress as one of the causes or conditions, but oftentimes, unfortunately, way too often, it's also tied to sexual trauma. And so, I'm not a therapist, so we won't be healing nervous system trauma the way a therapist can, but we acknowledge the trauma and we do yoga practices and other practices around that. So feeling really safe and having a therapist with integrity and strong boundaries is key, because you might get aroused in the session. For example, you might cry in the session, you might be attracted to your sex coach, right? So it's very important that the coach, of course, it goes without saying, maintain extreme professional boundaries, of course, not just non-consensual touch or anything strange like that, but not oversharing, not making this about their issues, that kind of thing. It's really important to have that integrity. And I think a lot, probably most coaches do. But the thing is, here in California, you can call yourself a sex coach or a life coach without any kind of governing body. There's no, certifying alliance or something like that. So, it's really important that your coach has, testimonials, even people that you could call or email and say, like, do you have a few people that I could just, that you've worked with that would be willing to, spend 5 minutes on the phone call with me or an email, just to get a feel. If you're uncertain, it's not required. If they have tons of amazing Yelp reviews or something, then, that's proof there. So I think that that's key, and it may not be something that's obvious, but I do think if you watch a few of their YouTube videos or go on their website, you get a feel for someone. You get a feel, and on their Instagram. Just, it's not always 100% accurate, but you can feel and you can trust your intuition. And if anything doesn't feel right, you don't need to know why. You just don't have to pursue that coach. Sometimes it's just our intuition or our unconscious talking. There's a wisdom there, and our rational mind will be like, well, I don't know why, but it doesn't matter why. So I would say just listen to your intuition.
And I want to go back to what you said at the very beginning. You were talking about being sexual and sensual without taking your clothes off, and kind of expanding that idea of what sex is or what can be sexy. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How people can kind of explore that with or without cannabis? Because I think, to me, that's something, it seems even more universal, something that people can access. Also, maybe they don't have time, or maybe they have house guests or something where they can't get away to full on make it, with their partner at that moment, but they can do something along those lines to feel.
Yeah, definitely. So, I love this idea of cultivating sensuality, and not necessarily seeing it as a means to an end to greater arousal and sexual pleasure, even though it is. But just sort of asking myself, or, encouraging my clients to ask themselves, how much pleasure can I give myself today? How much sensual pleasure? So it's like, okay, I grind my coffee every morning. Or when I grind my cannabis, just okay, or when I shampoo, ooh, like an extra little 5-second massage, or putting on my, body oil, or how much can I treat myself like a divine beloved or royalty, or, if I, how much can I pamper myself, and I expand my own capacity to hold pleasure. And a lot of people, myself included, have, issues of, shame or worthiness, where we think, okay, I'm allowed this much pleasure, but I'm not allowed that much pleasure, am I? And it's like, the more we give ourselves sensual pleasure and cultivate the senses, the more our capacity to hold pleasure. And it's like, oh yeah, no, I deserve a second helping of chocolate cake if I want one. And we become more, entitled in a positive way, not the negative use of entitled, but feeling deserving. Like, I don't have to work to earn pleasure. I'm born deserving, just like a cat or a dog doesn't have to earn its cuddles or its rest in the sun. I don't have to earn a nap or earn, stroking myself. So yeah, it's something that we have to put on, maybe formally, or fake it till you make it. It might be like, put a Post-it note in front of your coffee. Don't forget to smell the coffee grounds, to remind myself to, to do that, or to literally, when was the last time anyone literally stopped and smelled the road? Like, literally, like if you're walking by your neighbor's bush and it's near the sidewalk, to literally stop and smell the roses. The more we do that, the more we really do get appreciation and gratitude, and it uplifts us. So I see it as a spiritual act to cultivate pleasure. I see it as a path to, God or realization, or it's a tantric or yogic path, just as valid as meditating and all of the other paths. So pleasure as a spiritual path, but also as a form of political resistance. The powers that be would love if we just worked and shopped all day. So when I pause from working and shopping just to, wow, truly just this. I mean, it doesn't have to be elaborate. Just truly this for a few seconds. I'm detaching from that grind culture just for a moment, and maybe remembering what's truly important. Same with, wearing extremely comfortable or sensual clothes, just throwing away anything that doesn't feel good. Maybe you keep one tight corset for like that one dress that once in a while, but for the most part, like, what's the comfiest underwear I could possibly allow myself, or the sensualist, silkiest, like, no polyester, unbreathable fabrics here. Like, what's going to feel great? And so whether it's for political reasons or spiritual reasons or sexual reasons, I do believe cultivating the senses is key.
That all makes sense. And yes, definitely, I related to a lot of what you just said about like not feeling entitled to take the time. Um, so, what are you working on next, and how can people find out more about you and Ganja Yoga?
Yeah, so we're just about to do our first ever hybrid live stream Ganja Yoga training. So an international training that will be streaming. And we have a guy from Germany joining, someone from Uruguay, a Rastafarian from Jamaica, and then, 30 people from around America and Canada. So we'll all be kind of together learning about cannabis enhanced yoga, a 4-day intensive training, so that we can take, this relaxing marriage of cannabis and yoga to more and more communities around the world. So that's exciting because it's our first ever, and first of anything is great, especially a big global thing. And then there's a Ganja Yoga retreat in Portugal happening in the summer. And I'm just in conversation now about either Hawaii or Jamaica for a Ganja Yoga retreat in 2024. So yeah, good things in the cooker for sure.
And people can find out that out at ganjayoga.com.
Yeah, so ganjayoga.com is the main site for anything related to cannabis and yoga. And then my private site, Dussault, it's DEEDUSSAULT.com. That's my sex coaching site. So I keep them separate. There's a bit of information about either one on both, but they're just like a little bit separate in the feeling. So people can find me at one or the other, or if you just Google my name, it'll lead you there. But my Instagram has both together. Cannabis and sex are kind of both on my Instagram.
And in terms of working with you as a sex coach, is that only available to people in California or people in your geographic area, or do you do Zoom or online?
I do online as well. Yeah. So, people can come to my space here in Berkeley. I have a really sweet private space with a creek and like huge trees. It's really, really sensual and relaxing. But, I do a lot of Zoom sessions as well. Partner yoga, sex coaching, erotic awakening yoga, all of that can be done through Zoom. And I just actually graduated to be, I'm a psychedelic guide. I just finished level 2 of psychedelic guiding training. So that's a new thing I'm adding to my resume because, Ganja yoga, sex coaching is not enough. I got to be a psychedelic guide too, just the trifecta.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for sponsoring the Desire Summit. We really appreciate that. And everyone, check out Dee at ganjayoga.com and Ganja Yoga on Instagram and ddussault.com.
Thank you.